take it easy a bit in the shade. So let's have fun, and we got another important speaker coming to our stage. He has been a long-time member of our cannabis culture community. I'll bet you all know him already. He has waged war in real politics now. I give you my good friend Dana Larsen.
Hey, thank you, Marijuana Man, and thank you everybody for being here on Cannabis Day, one of my favorite days of the year. Everybody got enough marijuana so far? Okay, well, if you don't have enough, I'm sure you can find some around here somewhere. It's one of the hardest days to actually sell marijuana. There's so much available. So take your time, walk around, find the strain that works for you. You know, being here on Canada Day, on Cannabis Day, it makes me think about how important this plant has been to our country since the very first day, since before there was a Canada. You know, people say, oh, cannabis, what are you doing celebrating cannabis on Canada Day? But it's an important part of our culture and of our country since the very first days. You know, marijuana's been growing in Canada for over 400 years. The first cannabis plants were planted in 1606 in Nova Scotia. That was Canada's first marijuana crop. And marijuana has been so important to our country ever since then. You know, for over 200 years after that date, the government was trying to make people grow more marijuana. Their policy was to give you tax breaks if you would grow more cannabis, to punish farmers who weren't growing enough cannabis. They did everything they possibly could for 200 years to try to get Canadians to grow more cannabis. That is the kind of policy I want to see our country return to. That's what we need, to go back to the old days when we recognized the value of this plant and how important it was. And you know, that was the 1600s and the 1700s when the government was doing everything they could to grow more cannabis so they could use those stocks. They could make rope, they could make sails, they could use it to control the Navy. It was such an important plant. And in the 1800s, we started to learn about the medical benefits of marijuana. And more Canadians started to find the amazing health benefits of using this plant. They didn't smoke it like we do now. They would use it in a tincture. They would take cannabis tinctures, and I've got great stories of doctors across Canada experimenting with this and dosing themselves with huge doses of this tincture to find out what would happen and the wonderful psychedelic experiences they would have on these huge doses back in the 1800s. And you know, this plant was so important to our country up until the early 1930s and late 1920s, which isn't really that long ago if you look back over the whole history of Canada. And at this time, things changed and the petroleum industry came up. And instead of being able to compete equally and having an open playing field, there was convergence of interest between the racists, between the petroleum, between the new pharmaceutical industry, between the new timber industry that was making money cutting down our forests. And these groups got together and they passed laws to ban marijuana and make this plant illegal for the first time in our country's history. And that is where marijuana prohibition began. It wasn't out of any kind of understanding that marijuana was harmful and trying to protect people in some way. It was all about racism and about money. That's why we have marijuana prohibition in Canada. But Canadians kept using marijuana. And during World War II, Canadian soldiers went overseas and they went to Africa and they went to Europe and they smoked hash and they got high and they brought that back to their fellow Canadians. They brought that back to Canada. They brought it, some of them went to college and university after they came back from the war and they popularized marijuana. They popularized hash again. The beat culture developed. And the beat culture turned into the hippie culture. And the generation that grew up afraid of the nuclear war became the first generation to fully embrace psychedelics and marijuana. In the 1960s, we saw an incredible expansion of the cannabis culture in Canada and around the world. And we've seen things grow since then. And in the 1980s, our governments fought back. And they started to pass some of the harshest laws against marijuana that we've seen. Ronald Reagan in the US and Brian Mulroney in Canada passed incredible laws with mandatory minimums to put Canadians in jail for marijuana use. And in Canada they passed laws that said you couldn't even read a book about marijuana and you couldn't even buy a bong at a store. That's watching a Cheech and Chong video was illegal. That law was Section 462.2 of the Criminal Code, passed in the 80s, and parts of that law are still on the books today. And that law is still against the laws in Canada to sell a bong or a pipe, but we do it anyways. And then in the 1990s, Mark Emery came on the scene, my good friend Mark Emery, and launched the new crusade to fully legalize marijuana in Canada. And he opened up and started selling bongs and pipes, and then he started selling marijuana seeds, all against the law. Those things are still against the law, but you wouldn't know it walking around Vancouver or any other big city, because heroes like Mark Emery got out there, they got arrested, they got busted, they opened up the next day, and when they got busted, they opened up the next day after that again. And they kept doing it until they won. And in Vancouver, we have won. I mean, how much more freedom do we need right now than what we're enjoying here today? But our war is not over, you know. But I wanted to put it in perspective for you, to see that what you're doing here now, smoking pot, enjoying cannabis, celebrating our country, that is something that Canadians have been doing for over 400 years. That is part of our culture as Canadians. And my Canada includes cannabis. My Canada includes free marijuana. Let's go back to our roots and have a country where our government recognizes the value of this plant. Because for the first time in history now, we fully understand marijuana. We know how to use this plant to its wonderful maximum potential. When those doctors were getting a high in the 1800s, they didn't know what was getting them high, if it was the resin or the oil or what was going on. Their dosages were all confused. Now we know all the cannabinoids. Now we know how to grow hemp perfectly. Now we know how to maximize this plant to get the most value for our farmers and the most value for Canadians. And so I want you to remember that what we celebrate here today should not just be once or twice a year. It should be every single day. And let's make sure that every day in Canada is Cannabis Day, and that we can enjoy this kind of freedom, this kind of open farmers market, access to the world's best marijuana and marijuana extracts. Can you believe? I'm stunned. I've seen this event grow. I've seen the Canada Day and the 420 events grow from a few dozen people to what we have now. And I am stunned every time I come here and I see the incredible array of marijuana products available, how much stuff we have, the freedom we celebrate. Let's not take it for granted. Let's make sure that we preserve this here in Vancouver, that we spread this wonderful healing plant all over this country and then all over the world. Canada can once again be a leader in the world's best marijuana and the world's most free country when it comes to that. Let's make sure we work together. Take that spirit home with you. Grow marijuana, talk about marijuana, spread this most wonderful plant so that all Canadians can enjoy marijuana, not just once or twice a year here in Vancouver, but every day, no matter where we are in this great country of ours. Thank you so much. Happy Cannabis Canada Day, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Dana. And wise words and good info to take away from this place.